So I think we'll get started. So good morning and welcome to our Sage 200 Hints and Tips workshop. I am Barry Grimer from CentrePoint Software. Many of you I will have met. We're part of GCC Group, so we welcome all the Sage 200 users we support via GCC and CentrePoint, and also everybody joining that we don't support. The more the merrier, that's for sure. Certainly for our users, you'll know we've been running our monthly user group meetings in London for over 10 years now. We run those events not only to share information on Sage 200, but to all get together and meet and talk. So it's a little bit different. This is my first Sage 200 online event, very much this time for hints and tips, just for an hour and a half. Definitely at the end though, I'll remind you, we welcome your feedback. We will be pleased to look at putting on other similar events for other things that you'd like us to cover. This session is being recorded, so as long as we have your email address, we will send you a link afterwards, so this session can be replayed, and indeed you may want to share it with colleagues. During this live event, please use the Q&A, the conversation, to ask. You can ask lots of questions. I think the button is towards the top right of your screen. Hopefully you can see that or have found it. Having run through a test of this session yesterday, I realised devoting more time to the Q&A, which I'll do at the end, would mean reducing the content. So I've made a decision, I hope it'll be all right with you, that we'll have a 5-minute Q&A at the end. But then what I will definitely do is we will respond to everybody, every question afterwards. So you'll have individual responses. That is as long as we have your contact details. We may, depending on the questions we get, I may even then create some kind of document of Q&A so you can see other questions asked that may be helpful for you. Nobody's individual details will be shared either in this event or in any follow-up, so don't be embarrassed to ask questions. If when you logged on to the event you entered your email address, when you're asking a question, please just make sure your name is included so we know who you are, so we can come back to you if we don't cover it in the general Q&A at the end. If when you logged on you didn't give an email address, for us to be able to come back to you then, if when you ask a question, please do enter your email address. I will give you our contact email address at the end, so if there are questions after the event, or if afterwards you're not sure that you correctly gave an email address, you can send that in to us. So we know. If you are listening to a recording of this event, same applies. We will still be happy to receive questions even anytime after this event. So use the email address at the end and you can say, I've watched the recording, I have this question, that's fine. Shoot those into us, we will respond to those as well. So our agenda today, you can see we're starting with a very obvious topic of working remotely, some system administration, and then really the financial modules, fairly bigger piece at the end on report and inquiries, and then as I've mentioned, the Q&A right at the very end. Most of the items I'm covering today are based on conversations and help desk calls we've had with Sage users over the last few weeks. So a lot of what we cover today is pertinent in one way or another to our current working situation. The time doesn't allow me to give deep and full training on the items I'm going to cover, but what I wanted to do today, some of them I will, but what I really wanted to do today is to say, are you aware of these things? Because then, without going into massive detail, that gives then you things that you can look at afterwards, talk to your support, the help desk, look things up. I'm going to give you other lookup and things information. That way I can fit more in. But as I say, most of this has come from feedback, conversations with users over the last few weeks. Certainly for our own users, I guess you know who we are. We're CentrePoint Software, and as I've said, part of GCC Group. You will all know us for Sage 200, which is our specialization, and we certainly support many of you on your IT, Microsoft licensing, hosting Sage on Azure, quite a few of our sites, and maybe even telephony as well. And this then leads us into my first topic, which is nothing to show in Sage because we'll soon get into that. But this is really important, some really key points here. Sometimes to support you in the best way possible, we need to involve your IT. That will depend on the issue we're dealing with for you at the time. We've had calls in to the help desk over the last few weeks from users, some Sage users, but users who don't normally or don't regularly call the support desk or deal indeed with issues relating to Sage, but because of situations, and that's absolutely fine. There's no problem with that. We encourage that. But if we've had to then say, all right, we need to get connected to your server or speak to your IT, that person is not someone who readily knows maybe who that information to help us with that. And then it's taken time to find out. I think what normally happens is in the office, that person would shout across and someone else says, oh, I can sort that out. And we all know we're in a slightly different place now. So what I would encourage you as Sage users do is make sure that every Sage user, everyone knows who to contact for support, because that will help us to help you better and more quickly. If your support is an internal individual, I'm afraid to say this, but we have to be aware that I'm afraid our situation is going to carry on for a long time. People may become unavailable. So we need to think, if that person is unavailable, where do we go next? Most of you will have external support providers. So if the internal person is not available, know those external details. Indeed, it's even more helpful if you want to email into us or to your support provider to say, if ever needed, these are our current IT contact details. Then if we're dealing with a situation with you, we've got that on file. We know exactly where to go and who to speak to, rather than everybody phoning around trying to find that out. Help us help your support provider to help you, and be aware, what if a certain person is not available? Where do we go next? The second, I'm going to talk a bit more about this after this slide, because there's something else for me to show you. But most important, most of us, not quite all, but most of us are working from home, and we need to be very aware of what that means for Sage 200. There are better ways to use Sage 200 from home, and there are not so good ways. If we are using Sage from home in a not so good way, it may work, but we need to be very aware, this is important. If you lose connection and we're not connecting in the right way, it can corrupt the Sage 200 data. That is obviously a bit of a problem. So we need to be making sure with IT that we're connecting in the right way to minimize that risk. I'm going to talk about that again in a moment. You can see my bullet point refers to an Ask Sage article. I'll tell you about the Ask Sage knowledge base as well. And then you can see the article number there, which I will show to you. Leads then nicely into the third, and for this event, probably the most important message I've got for you is be sure you are backing up your Sage system properly. That's the Sage databases, which are in Microsoft SQL Server, and that's in capital letters, and the Sage folder on your server. All the transactional data, main information is kept in the SQL databases, but not everything. Attachments, designed reports, there's quite a lot of things kept in the Sage folder and subfolders on your server. You must make sure those are being backed up as well. I've mentioned if you're not connecting to Sage in the right way, that could result in a corruption. It is a real possibility if we're not doing it the right way. If anything happens to your server in the office, we can reinstall Sage. It's a product we have. If you have a different server, or we can reinstall Sage onto a Microsoft Azure hosted server, we can get the software back. What we can't get back, what we need from you is your backups, obviously. My final bit of advice there is, it's one thing to say to IT, are we backing up properly? IT may say yes. There is only one way to know for sure, and that is to run a trial restore. Personally, I think every organization should run a trial restore at least once a year, maybe more regularly. If you took to your IT, depending on how you're backing up in your Sage provider, there may be a little bit of cost for that. That little bit of cost of time for doing a practice restore is massively outweighed. Well, think about what would happen if something does happen to your server and we find the backup wasn't running properly, and you've lost literally all of your accounting data. So invest think about a trial restore. And we have two sorts of organisations at the moment. Some are very busy, others are finding time to look at Sage and look at things they may not have had time before. If you're one of those, that would be this is a perfect time to check, think about a trial restore. If you're hosting, as a lot of our sites do, on the Microsoft Azure, then you can be pretty sure, because that is part of the Azure environment, is backups and the security and all the things that provides. So you're pretty much going to be okay, but nevertheless, it's worth a check with whoever your provider is and IT. Double check on the backups. Worst case happens, with a backup, we can get you back and running pretty quickly. So we're about to move to Sage, but I do want to finish with something I've just mentioned, which is useful in two ways. As well as the help files, and I'll talk about those in Sage, there is a whole knowledge base which everyone can have access to. You don't need any logons for it, called Ask Sage. So you can see these are screenshots. I've clicked on, I've gone to Google, and I've Googled Ask Sage, and it is the top result that comes up. You can see ask.sage.co.uk. Brings you to a knowledge base. If you're looking at Sage, your Sage 200, and thinking of ways to improve your Sage, you may find this knowledge base very useful. It covers all of the Sage products. So you can see there are options to enter questions, choose a product, and then a subset of the product. In this case, for what I'm talking about here, I know the article number 46342, and you can see that says working from home with Sage 200. So my advice is to look at this article, read the article, share it with your IT. The article covers remote access, the right ways, the not so good ways, and other considerations. So please read this, please share it with your IT provider. If you are not connecting to Sage in the right way, speak to your IT provider and your Sage support about how that can be improved. And I remind you again, the most important thing, make sure there are backups, because even if there are problems, and it may not just be due to remote connection, we always need to know we can restore you from a backup, and that applies whether we're working from home or not. Okay. I'm going to start with, there are two Sage programs, the normal Sage, which we'll come to shortly, and a program called System Administration, which is where I am logged into now. This is mostly used where we are looking at users, and we would use this to create users. Something that's happened on support over the last few weeks is about user access. So first of all, with administration, I would advise you to be aware within your organization who can access this administration program and who cannot. If access to this program is limited to one individual, I would encourage you to think of whether that is good and whether there should be others given access. Again, if we take support calls, we need to come in to look at users. The one person who has access to this is not available. That's going to delay us helping you. Also, when we look at this, consider we have sometimes found organizations where users have access to this who maybe we shouldn't have access. So it's all about having the right access, but be aware anything that's down to one individual at the moment, consider the risk that might pose in the future. For our own users, because it's not so easy to know in normal Sage who has access to this. For CentrePoint users, under accounting system, if you're on a later version, 2017 or later, we added a little inquiry. It's under accounting system manager in the settings menu, and it's called an admin inquiry, and it will tell, anyone can use that, and it will tell you who has the administration rights. So you might want to run that. And if the people who have got those admin rights are people who may have been furloughed or for other reasons, speak to your support provider now. Don't wait until there's a reason to look at this and then be trying to work out how we can log in. Moving on a bit more with the security and the features, Sage 200 users, I'm at the top of my list, are linked to a role, a group, and there's a few things to say here. If we go to my next menu option down to those roles, this is my group, and if I right click and go to features, this screen will now show me the features that I have access to in Sage. They are mostly, but not quite. Generally, they're sort of driven by menu options. So there's a few things here, certainly pertinent to what we'll talk about today. Let me give some examples. If I open the nominal ledger, and we can see where there are ticks missing, then I know something is turned off. And if I expand administration, there are two items here: 0 nominal account balances, delete archived transactions. In my view, there is no reason that those options should be turned on for any user. You would never use those options. It would be an extreme case, and you would only ever do that under the with the help desk help anyway. So a lot of users, we're in the world where we're doing things we don't normally do. We're going into areas of Sage we don't usually use for obvious reasons. My encouragement, nothing to do with working at home particularly, but turn off features. We have a document that advises a number of things that should be turned off. You don't want somebody, we might think we wouldn't do it, but it has happened where somebody has run 0 the nominal account balances, and we can imagine the the problems that will cause for us. Equally, and certainly as we carry on with this workshop, we'll talk about things that maybe should be turned on that people don't have access to, and I'll give some pointers while we're here. I'm going to purchase ledger and advanced, and my top item here is bank details, so mine is turned on. This was a feature introduced in version 2019 spring. It depends on the version you're on. Turning this off will prevent users of this group being able to change supplier bank account details or enter supplier bank account details. So a user with this turned off, they can see the bank account details in purchase ledger inquiry, but they cannot change those. And you may want to look at this and consider who should not have that as a feature. It's quite important. Two of the other items I'm going to mention as we go through the workshop. We have an invoicing module. Invoicing was introduced in version 2017, and I know quite a few of our users have said they're going to be looking at using the invoicing module. Now they've got time to think about it, and saying to Spot, actually, I think we should have it. I can't see it. It's because it's been unticked. And equally, I'm going to talk about Excel reporting. And some users I've been speaking to have said, no, we've been to one of the workshops that I run in London and using this time to set Excel reports, but can't find it on the menu, or when it's opened, there are reports missing that they think that I showed. So again, for things we're going to, if you're not accessing something or able to access, it could just be down to a tick box. So use the features, make sure things are turned off that should be, make sure things are turned on to help you do your jobs. Something to bear in mind, and again, you may want to say, if you send emails into your support provider, to our help desk, to pre-arm us with information, it's going to help us more quickly. Who's got access to system admin? Generally, the assumption is if a user has access to system administration, the point of them having that access is they have the rights to change the security, the privileges of users. So if somebody contacts us and say, I need to use, we've had calls, I need to use a part of Sage I don't normally use, that person is unavailable, we've got to do this now. I'm being asked, if that person hasn't got system administration access, we can't turn it on. We need to go to somebody who has. That's two things. One, because technically we have to turn it on for that person, but then that is assumption they will have because they've got it, they have the authority to make those security changes. So it's something for you to think about internally, is who has this authority to make these changes. Nearly there. One tiny thing just on the companies, it's a very small thing, but may be helpful. For each of your companies in Sage 200, you can set a color. Users who use Sage since it was line 100 will remember before Microsoft made us grey. You could set the whole color for the line 100 product would be bright green, the whole screen would be green or blue or red. It's a visual indicator to the company you're logged into. It's not unheard of that we go for lunch, we come back, we carry on working to realise after an hour we're in the wrong company. You can set a colour, and I'll point it out as we go through. So I've set for my main company, I set a colour of bright yellow. It doesn't change the whole screen, it's just a bar, but it's a little bit of a visual indicator to help us know the company we're logged into. Okay, so in summary, think about who can change settings for users. Make sure everybody knows how to contact your IT internal and the external provider is the important thing. Do make sure you're connecting to Sage in the right way. Use the Ask Sage article, talk to your IT and your support provider, and most importantly, always anyway, make sure we've got good backups for your Sage 200. And now Sage 200. I'm going to start gently with you. But again, we've got people phoning into the help desk who may do a very simple few tasks in Sage, and now they're being called upon to do more, and a little bit of help just navigating and understanding on Sage may help. Some basic things really. The version of Sage I'm using is the latest version. This style, this look and feel for Sage 200 was introduced in 2015 because of the wonderful joy of making tax digital over the last year. Many of you will have upgraded, so I'm guessing most of you are on this similar or later version. For those who may be trying to use Sage in larger ways than they're used to, something that often goes unnoticed is search menu in the top bar. I'm going to type journal and search to point out one thing. It does search the menu, and we can see we have menu items called journal. It's also returned to me items where the word journal is not included. Account inquiry, for example. If I click in account inquiry, the reason is it also looks at field names within screens. So this returns to me not just menu items with that name, but the screens where that name appears, journal. So if I'm looking for something, I'm not sure where it is, it's a good way to locate items. If I want to use this in the future, I wonder where it is, I may right click, show in the menu, it takes me back to the main menu, and I can see nominal ledger, inquiry, there it is. Now I know where it is for next time. The list views is our general way of navigating around Sage. To make sure we know, because it will help us with our jobs, right click, columns. A user may choose by selecting or deselecting the columns they wish to show in their view. You are not changing it for anybody else. It's only about yourself. And once selected, columns can be dragged and dropped and moved around and put back. Right click, export. We can export this list to Excel, either all of the items or highlighted selection. If I want to get a list of customers or suppliers, whatever it may be, out into Excel, right click, choose the columns we want, send it out to Excel. It's a very quick way. Be very aware of one thing, the scroll bar, when it was introduced, it does say on the top screen, if we got the scroll bar enabled, you are showing up to 1,000 records only. If you export, it will only export those we see up to 1,000. If my list might have more than 1,000, please make sure you untick. The message disappears. I'm now showing all items. My export will now include all items. Equally to be aware of, depending on the list view, we have totals at the bottom. The totals is not, it's often looked at and just assumed it's a list, total of the entire list. It is not. It is a total of the highlighted section. If we want to get a total of the entire list, you need to clear and swap to select all to get the full total. So be aware of the totaling and how that works. The shortcut bar, a lot of what I do today, I will use the shortcut bar, and if in very simple ways, I might select 2 accounts, to click journal, which opens a journal entry screen with 2 accounts selected. So it's a selection method. It goes slightly more than people often realize. I think a good example is if we had a support call for someone to say we want to send out customer statements, but to a selected handful, 5 or 6, sales ledger, list view, highlight those accounts. You must always use the shortcut bar at the top, but you can run the statements. It won't look like it selected them, but when you send them, you can test it. When it sends them, it will send them to those that were highlighted. So you can select for sending documents out to particular accounts. And finally, with general navigation, one thing you might choose to do, it's much easier now than in earlier versions, and you probably all know there is a favourites bar. Yeah, I've got quite a lot in my favourite bar. The favourite bar, to put items into this bar, is simply when you're on a screen, you will see a star. It's in the top right. It's normally white. If you click to make the star yellow, you've added it onto the star list, the favourites list. On this list, you can then, I'll show it later, but you can reorganize, you can put things in folders. Very easy to create your own menus for things that you regularly use, or even create a folder. These are the things I want to do at month end. Create yourself a list of the screens that you want to go for reports or inquiries you might run, just to make life easy for you. I'm going to look at Accounting System Manager and a few features in here. Under the Settings tab, one thing I will say is I mentioned the inquiry CPS's CentrePoint Software, the admin inquiry at the bottom there. For our sites, all Sage users can run this, and this is a good one to run. If we're looking at what we've got access to and not access to, is a role inquiry. You're going to get the recording of this so you can see the things that I've decided to turn off. So me as a user, I'm linked to the role of Account Plus. We saw that earlier. These are the items that I have disabled. The Purge Audit Log I point out to you here, and I'm going to talk about that. It was a new feature. In my view, that's definitely something that should always be disabled. Use this to check, have I got access to everything that I would like access to help me do my job? Maybe some of the things I'm going to show you later. Also for others, make sure the grid itself on this little snapshot inquiry doesn't auto expand. We've put an export to Excel because it could be a big list. So use the export to Excel. If the box looks like it's full, you will then see a full list of all. These are the features not enabled. The naming of these features is the name of the feature within Sage administration. So sometimes one might look at this and it's not always immediately clear what it relates to, but use your support provider to help with that. We're going to Accounting System Manager, Settings, System Settings, Transaction Settings. A couple of things here about controlling Sage, being more aware and making, well, we're trying to prevent mistakes really. And I'm also going to talk about something called transaction analysis. Just to start with here, transaction date validation is about every user, about every transaction, slightly aside to the accounting periods, but sets a window of transactions that may be entered based on, well, in my case, based on date. It can also be based on the status of accounting periods. Because of the period control, if we enter a transaction dated before today, and if I date a transaction called 1066, we all know it will still go into the current accounting period. So it may be irritating to have the wrong date, but in accounting terms, it's in current period. More about the future. So for me, it says my normal range for future postings is 150 days. That's within my normal range, but we have an acceptable range. Beyond 365 days is beyond acceptable. If I try to enter a transaction, even just in pure error, I date a transaction 3020 rather than 2020 or whatever the date may be, I will get an error saying you can't enter this. If the date of the transaction is between normal and acceptable, you get a warning, but it will still post. For long-term users of Sage, and before this feature was there, it's been there a long time now, but line 100 users, we nearly always look in deferred postings, and there are some good dates in there. They don't need to be there. Make sure you've got this control turned on just to help users and prevent errors. There is also a bottom option here, which is not very well worded. If you have this in your version, it says accounting period validation, always turn it to not allowed. It doesn't really explain what it is. It is possible, if it's set to allowed, it is possible in the cash book, you may never have noticed, to post a nominal entry through the cash book where you give different dates, and the double entry for that transaction may, depending on the date you give, post into different accounting periods. We all know there's never a reason to do that usually, so make sure it's set to not allowed. If ever you have a panic and you run a trial balance, it doesn't balance, you will call the help desk and say, in a panic, my TB does not balance. Invariably, the help desk will say, I've got a good idea what may have happened. It can be fixed, of course, but nevertheless, make sure this setting is not allowed. You will save yourself that panic. I'm going to talk, as we go through more into the nominal ledger, about this feature called transaction analysis code. It's been there since 2005. I think you can assume that everybody has it. You may be using it. There is a tick box. This feature works in nominal ledger, cash book, sales ledger, and purchase ledger. It can be turned off, and because it can be turned off, if it's always been turned off, you may have no idea it exists or is there. It is also the one column in Sage that you can rename, so you can give it a different name to transaction analysis. If you're doing very simple, not project accounting, but recording a job number or project code on cost transactions in the purchase ledger, you might rename it job code, project code, whatever it may be. In the later versions, if you rename it, you have to log out of Sage and come back in again for that to refresh. Earlier versions, it did it straight away. If we think we've got a reason for transaction analysis code, back onto our menu, there's an option halfway down called transaction analysis codes. It's a very simple list, easy to maintain. It's a 20-character code, alphanumeric. You can give it some good description, then give it a description, and there is a tick box, is this code active or not? When you make something inactive, it's still there, it can still be reported on, but we're not allowing users to enter transactions to it. This transaction analysis code is cosmetic. It may be switched on and off. It may be that you phone the help desk to say, we're about to move office, we're about to refurbish. I'd like to capture those costs. I don't really want to create nominal codes. That's not quite the thing I want to do. Invariably, the help desk will say, that's unless you're using it for something else already, but there's a perfect little code. You can switch it on, transaction analysis, use it for this duration. When you've finished, you can turn the whole thing off again if you want to take it away from the menus. One small other thing while we're under Accounting System Manager, and dealing with period ends, but as a housekeeping exercise, once a month, I would suggest it's good if you come in under System Utilities, Balance Ledgers, and just run a check on your ledgers. It's a fairly high level check, but nevertheless, it's worth running. You can see you run it by module, and commercials is underneath on the menu. You can run it for all accounts, you would, and don't be nervous about it because there is an option for validate and only report. Don't change anything. You can validate, report. If it shows anything up on the report screen that comes up, you can contact your support provider and say, I've run it, it's giving me something. Invariably, they'll get you to run the second option correct, but they'll explain what that means and what needs to be done afterwards. Good housekeeping exercise. While I'm here, I will just point out the yellow bar across the top. And if we get used to sort of noticing these bars, the color I set for the company, it might just give me an indicator of the company I'm logged into, especially if we have lots of companies. That's my piece for Accounting System Manager. Okay, nominal ledger. Quite a few sites have spoken to us to say they're using this current working situation as an exercise in tidying up Sage, doing those rainy day things we've never found time to do in the busy hustle and bustle of an office. One of those things is looking at the chart of accounts, and we're going to come on to a reporting piece at the end. Introduced in version 2017 summer is the ability in nominal ledger and cash book to hide an account. So I can change a nominal account to hidden, so its status is either active or hidden. The same was then applied in version 2018 spring to the sales and the purchase ledgers. So what I'm talking about here is really the financial modules, where if you want to do some tidying up now may be a good time for you. If we make an account hidden, I'm going to make it on this account here. And save. Refresh my list. It's disappeared. So the hidden is starting to do one thing. There's one important second thing that not everybody might realize. If we hide an account, yes, we're tidying up our nominal codes. Again, longer term users of Sage, it would be rare to look at their nominal code list and not see accounts that have the name do not use in capitals. So it might be a nice exercise to clear those out. If anybody was eagle-eyed, they will have noticed that when I hid my account, it actually had a balance on it. Sage does not give a warning. It will hide supplier accounts if they've got outstanding balances. It does not mess up the reports. If you run a trial balance or an age creditors, whatever that report may be, they will still be reported. They have to be for the integrity of that report. There are workspaces which we will look at which don't filter them out immediately. You can set your own filter, and there is also a report in each of the modules, Nominal, Ledger, Sales, to report hidden accounts. So you can look at the accounts that have been hidden. Be aware of this next setting. So Nominal Ledger, Utilities, Ledger Setup, Ledger Settings. There is a tick box at the bottom on the first tab, Account Selection, which says, am I restricting account selection, my posting account, to the active accounts? If you hide an account, that does not stop people posting to it. It will stop it appearing on drop-down lists, but we all get used to entering codes. If they post a transaction and enter the code, it'll post to the account. So you may then want to turn this option on, which says, I don't want you entering any transactions to the hidden accounts. That's a good way to clear up. If we're doing some tidying up, getting rid of accounts, you may even be doing some fairly lightweight chart of account reorganization. Think about using hidden accounts and maybe clearing up supplier, customer accounts as well. What I do want to do is I'm going to enter I want to come back to the transaction analysis code, and indeed to do that, I'm going to enter a Nominal Ledger journal. In entering a Nominal Ledger journal, I'm just trying to do things that you may not always do, just to make sure you're aware. So in fact, I'm going to choose a template. We have multiple templates. They're set up in the transactions menu. It's just like setting up the bones of a journal already. So regular journals that we may enter into Sage, you can preset a template. A template will have the accounts. That's to save me time. The options are, we can leave in the template all of the balances 0, so I just simply enter my values. You can add more accounts or take them away. We can also preset values. That just brings those values up on the template. You can still change them as long as the journal is going to be 0, we can still post it. My template is something slightly different, and it's set as the type of percentage. And you set percentages against all of the rows. And that means when I put a value into one of those cells, based on my preset percentages, it immediately fills in all of those other values. I might use this if there's an account that I put, a holding account I put transactions into during a month. At the end of the month, I want to journal out of that account and apportion it across multiple codes. This might be a good way to do that. The other things I'd point out on this journal, version 2015, our Nominal Ledger narrative, which occurs on all posting screens, not just the journals, of course. This field was increased by Sage from 60 characters, 60, to 6,000 characters. So from 2015 onwards, you can certainly enter a good amount of text against each of the rows. And I definitely want to point out this column, which is now turned on for me. It may be you already see this column, it's called something else. As I say, it's the column that can be renamed. But I can select one of those active values for this row of the transaction. So we're tagging, we're giving an extra piece of information beyond the nominal code itself to this, which clearly then I'm going to be able to report on if that's got some use to me. In version 2018, we saw another new feature added, which is to say, post and attach. So I may post my journal, that's straightforward, and then have the option to attach any document. It could be PDF, Word, Excel, more likely for a journal. So if you've got two screens, you can drag and drop files into the screen. It will attach them. You can add multiple attachments. For me, I'll click attach a file. I'm going to choose a spreadsheet and attach that, and you can give that document a description as well and click save. That saves my journal. That attachment clearly then is available to me through the transaction inquiry. In a nominal ledger, it's transaction inquiry, you go to the details tab, and not only do you see the attachments where you can open them, you can also then add more attachments. So if you've saved the journal, forgotten to attach, or more documentation comes along, it would be useful to attach. You can do that through the transaction inquiry. Nominal ledger current transaction list is very similar to the audit trail list, but I've come to this list because this gives me some extra features which we'll talk about. The first thing on the transaction analysis, we do need to look at transactions to see the transaction analysis code. The clue is in the name. So here I'm seeing my journal. So I've set my URN number in the left-hand column into descending order. So I'm always looking at my audit trail, working up and rolling over. And so I've got my transaction analysis code. So beyond the nominal code itself, I can see that extra tag of information as well as the narrative. If we're reporting, I won't need to run it. The report we're all very familiar with, but again, we think we've got to be looking at transactions. So transaction listing would be the obvious report. If we run a transaction listing, I can see I've got a selection by nominal transaction analysis. So I might say, show me the transactions relate to a job number, or show me transactions relating to the office move, the refurb, a marketing campaign. I'll get a list of those transactions. Actually, I'm not going to cover it in any detail. Many of you will know what we call ODBC. It's been around with Sage since the early 90s. It's not a new thing, but one might create an Excel sheet. I think for me, I have done, so I have a pivot table here. It's very simple, quick to set up. If you've never used ODBC, you might want some consultancy to help with this, but I've got nominal codes going down. I've got my transaction analysis codes as columns. If I go to data, you can set these water. ODBC is an Excel spreadsheet that's linked onto the SQL database directly. It bypasses Sage actually, so it doesn't need any Sage licensing. So I can look at my transaction analysis codes. If I select an amount, because it is made up from transactions, if I double click that, it will show me the transactions of which that was posted to in the nominal ledger. The transaction analysis codes sit in the nominal ledger transaction table. The ODBC reports can be run by anybody in the organisation as long as they've got security on the network. So it is a free way of sharing data, letting people run their own queries on Sage if that's the right thing for you. The nominal ledger list view that we're on, there's a couple of things. These two buttons at the top only appear on this screen. They don't appear on any menu. So unless we're regularly looking at this screen, we may not even be aware of them. The first left-hand item says amend transaction details. The amend transaction details lets me change cosmetics on any transaction, regardless of where it was entered. We're not changing any accounting that's taken place, but we can change the narrative and we can change the transaction analysis code, or indeed apply those after the fact. If we posted a transaction and then afterwards realize it related to a campaign, a job, you can come in and set that at this point. If we've got information that we would like to add to a transaction after it was entered, we might pop in. We know we have 6,000 characters. You may add additional information for future reference against those transactions. You can do that with all transactions driven through the nominal ledger. The second option is an option of correct transactions. This is corrections. We have corrections in other modules now as well. In this case, it's about correcting a nominal ledger journal. We only use this in the nominal transactions. If we need to correct something in the purchase ledger, it now has its own correction options, which are pretty good. The correction also allows me to change cosmetics. Here I'm changing more. If I've made it's a straightforward journal, I just shouldn't have entered it, it's a mistake. We can simply click reverse. It will immediately post a reverse journal. I can change the values. I can add nominal codes. So if I entered £100 debit and credit, it should have been 200s. Change it to 200. You can make changes to the way it should have been entered if I'd got it right the first time. That's all we do. My reverse option is now grayed out. Post correction is now my only option, and I'm going to post the correction. We have a rule in Sage 200. We are not breaking that rule. You can never, ever change the accounting that has already taken place. My journal is here, these 2 rows, my original journal. I'm going to refresh my list. I will see something happen at the top. What Sage will do, it reverses out the journal that I entered originally and now reposts that journal with the correction, with the proper values. I only change the values, it might have more nominal codes. So if you've entered a journal, it needs to be corrected. Open the correct transactions, change it to how it should have been entered. It's not the movement you're entering the final result. Click post, it will do the accounting and the postings for you. How to correct. I've spoken about people finding time and to look at improving their nominal codes and chart of accounts, make life easy, and that might lead on to the reporting piece at the end. We've also talked about entering journals and using templates, of course. Nominal ledger, utilities, import menu, import ledger file. If you are using the standard Sage transaction import, you will know it is not the most user-friendly or the greatest thing in the world. It was written by Sage for when we use it for when we were setting up new systems. Sage didn't really give any thought to it as being used as a regular journal import. That is why it is clunky and a bit technical. Certainly we have an answer. I would think other dealers would as well. There are certainly add-on products as well. For us, certainly if you're using that Sage import, you might definitely want to look at, we have our own journal import. It's called Journal with Reversal. The template is very user-friendly. In fact, the template, the Excel template, is virtually the same as the normal entry screen in Sage. There's nothing technical about it. If you can enter journals in Sage, you can use our template. You browse, choose the file, give it a date. You can set it reversing if you want, validate and import. That is a lot better. But again, if you're not supported by us, your provider may have something as well. But do speak to your provider. I'm importing using the transaction import. It's pretty awful. What are my options? There was an enhancement in Sage. I'm trying to remind myself of the version. 2019 spring, where there's an option for export nominal accounts, which is highlighted here. I won't run it. The export nominal accounts, well, actually simply does that. It exports all of your nominal accounts. The important thing is it exports that file in the format of an account import. The import screen, if we're choosing accounts, has a new option to say update account if it exists. So it is now possible to export nominal accounts, to make global changes. You can't change the code cost center department. You can make it hidden, but you can't change the fundamentals. Those are part of your accounting, your chart of accounts, but you can change settings on those accounts. You may make them hidden, and you can then use the standard import. You don't need any formatting, import them back in. If you tick this box and the account, because normally the account import is for bringing in new accounts, this tick box will say if the account exists, make these changes to those accounts. This option also appears in sales ledger and the purchase ledger. So rather than going through, if it's individuals, you can make them hidden. If we're doing it more globally in bulk, use this option. That'll make it much quicker for you. One really important point, have a test company in your Sage. Always test imports fully in a test company before you run any import on the live data. The help desk would much rather have a call from you to say, I'm about to do some testing. Can you set me up a test company if you haven't got one? Can you refresh the data on my test company? It's so old, it's not really relevant. They would rather have that call than a call afterwards to say, I ran an import, guess what's happened? Make sure you've got a test company. Don't make any drastic changes without testing first. The advice really, I've mentioned backup before, I'm going to say it again now, even in live data, it is recommended always, for obvious reasons, to have a backup before you run any import on live. As probably we're backing up overnight, my suggestion is with running imports, certainly anything of any significance, I would always think about running those imports first thing in the morning, If disaster does happen, something goes in that shouldn't, and it warrants it, you've got a chance of going back to a backup, running those imports at 5 o'clock in the evening. We're going to lose a day's work if that's what we would have to do. A couple of general things on the nominal ledger also, and again about people doing things they may not have previously had to think about. Tax and making tax digital, VAT. I was talking to somebody yesterday, and I'm quite. We've been covering this to death in our last year of workshops. The MTD story has only just started. It's certainly not finished. We wrote. I'm not going to go through all of this. Don't worry. We did write a guide for our users that goes through in different scenarios of how we might submit MTD returns, versions of Sage which are slightly different. You can then click the link here. It takes you to the section on the slides, and it is like there's lots of screenshots. Also, if we need to make adjustment to the VAT return, I'm flying through screens just to show the information that's there. How to make adjustments, and there's two different ways we can make adjustments on the VAT return or on John's. If you're one of our users and you're now involved in something you did, or you just want to be reminded you've been doing these returns, thinking about VAT for a year, just drop us an email, say, can I have the guide? But equally, speak to your support provider. Again, they'd rather, I think, generally help with preparing for something rather than after something's gone wrong. Helping someone at the beginning is always easier than afterwards. Along the same lines, there's nothing for me to show particularly. Period end, I know people are running period ends. Hopefully there's an internal process. What I would say is, again, I talked earlier about users preparing for the future. I'm afraid to say this current situation we're not starting to come out of it. It's going to be there for a long time. We hope people are going to be off work still. Cross-train within your team. If somebody's ill, can we carry on? What will we do? Can we still do the things we need to do? Please use this as an opportunity to cross-train. We've had calls into support, which we'll deal with. There's no doubt about that. Somebody said, I need to pay a supplier. I don't normally do this, payment suppliers. We've got to pay suppliers. I am not the person who does it. We can certainly go through how to do these things in Sage. What we don't know is your internal practice. Prepare yourselves, if not already, think about it. Think about if multiple people are away, how do we carry on as a business? That's going to help you. We can support you on the software, but not the internal process on this. We've worked with you on that. Year end. My advice, my view on year end is I don't expect any user to remember a year. It's something we do once a year. I would imagine users, if I was a user, I'd be calling support in the lead up a month before, saying I'm heading towards my year end. Can you remind me what are the things I should be thinking about and doing? That'll give you just some confidence. It's a fairly straightforward thing in Sage, I believe, but things are always straightforward when we understand them. And again, at the point of year end, it's getting boring for me to say it. Most people would call support, say I need to run my year end. Can we get a backup of the company? So we get that backup before you run that year end process. And as many of you will know, that backup is installed in Sage. It's one you can log into. It's a good backup. And once you've moved into the new year, you can then refer back to that year end company. So in summary, on the nominal ledger, check your settings, make sure the transaction date settings are more controlled with preventing errors in Sage. That should be the case anyway. If we think there's a use for transaction analysis code, you might want to have a play with that, play with hidden test data, enter some transaction, look at the reporting, if that's useful for you. And if we're using time to tidy up my nominal ledger, so my colleagues, when my other colleagues do come back to work, they'll be amazed at how clean and tidied up my Sage is now looking. Think about using the hidden and about now we can import those global changes to save some time. I can see we've had lots of questions coming in. I'll encourage you here. In fact, I'll try as I go through. We've only got a few more sections to go. Time flies by. I'll give a little pause after sections. Do fire those questions in because I am keen to cover some things at the end, and certainly we can come back to you afterwards as well. Move over into the purchase ledger. I will give you a reminder that under amend, or when creating an account, remember there was a tick box earlier in the features where there was a bank details, mine was ticked. That means I have access to this bank tab and I may change the supplier bank details. If I'm using payment processing in Sage, this is the bank that I'm going to be making this payment to. If that's unticked, then we don't see that tab. I cannot make those changes. Only the authorized people can change those bank details. That came in version 2019 spring. There is something else connected to this, which may seem odd. There is a reason. I'm going back to Accounting System Manager. And under Accounting System Manager, there is a menu option for Audit Log. The audit log was introduced in 2018 winter. And the audit log is currently recording, I say currently, it is currently recording changes to supplier bank account details. If a user does have access to the bank tab where they can enter or change details, the audit log records those changes, when they were made, who made them, the value before, the value afterwards. If there were no bank details entered previously, they would be blank, obviously, and these are the values that we can see that I entered and when I entered them. The audit log is recorded. It appears under Accounting System Manager because Sage's idea, their intention is that the audit log will grow, it will expand, and it will cover other areas. So at the moment, although it only relates really, there is something about purchase in purchase order processing, but generally it's really about the purchase ledger, and that's why it is where it is. Personally, at the moment, rather than coming down to here, I would use I'm not sure, never sure if it's a pen or a pencil. It says edit menu. I would edit my menu. I would go down and get my audit trail. I would move it on the menu and I would put it in the purchase ledger under the payment processing menu at the top. Then it becomes part of my payment process. Is first of all check has any bank details been changed this week before I then go on to think about paying suppliers. You can easily move things around on the menu or indeed add it to your favorites list. Create a little folder for your payment processing. I sort of mentioned it earlier. You will have seen when I showed my disabled features, there was something on there called Purge the Audit Log that relates to this feature. It is normal Sage, rightly or wrongly, that where it shows the audit log, you can run a report. By default, every user also has access to purge that log. I could go in, make changes to supplier details if I have rights to do so. I might then come in and purge that and clear the entire log. And there is no log of the cleared log. It will be empty. Nobody will know who ran it. There is no place for that in the Sage. I can't imagine any reason you would ever need to clear the log. It's one of the features to turn off. It has no place to be turned on. In version 2018 summer, I won't need to go through the entire screen. Most of us will be aware of a purchase invoice entry screen. We saw it in the nominal ledger, so I won't go to detail, but again, as a standard feature, save and attach. You may attach your purchase invoices or supporting documentation at the point of entry or on the inquiry screen. You can have multiple documents. The attach feature exists in the nominal ledger journal entry now and the inquiries where you can attach more. I mentioned that. Also on a completed VAT return, when you've completed a VAT return, you may attach documents. That's got nothing to do with making tax detail filing, purely internal, but you can attach that any supporting documentation for future reference. It appeared in the purchase ledger, as we've seen, invoices and credit notes, and in later version then also appeared, probably of less use in truth, but under the sales ledger again on invoices and credit notes. One thing to quickly say, and we're talking about control, because we're not so much shouting across the office or telling each other things. This is our transaction inquiry in the purchase ledger. You can see I've got 2 documents with attachments, and attached documents will show me those, allow me to add more. But what I want to just point out, it's a very simple mechanism of this column called query, and a letter in this column, just needs a letter, will prevent this invoice from being paid. So I'm working at home where I am. I know I've got an issue with this invoice. I don't want it to be paid by mistake, and look next week and found it's been paid. Any character, one character, but number or a letter, stops that being paid through the payment processing menu. If I'm putting it under query, we might use that letter to indicate something particular. The letter A means something to me. It gives me some information about why. But what I might also do is I want to put a memo note. In this case, we don't use this column. This column is an indicator. But I have the drill down where we're on the bottom left. There is a memo item. And just like you can on account records, I may add a memo note about why I've put it under query. The memo immediately shows the letter A because we have a toggle on a note to say, is the memo active? It is yes. So the letter A is an active note. I can toggle my note when I've resolved the query maybe to say it is inactive, and then later I might delete the character. I'm happy now, it can be paid. But use the query flag is my suggestion. We're controlling what's being paid. We don't want things to be paid by mistake. You can add multiple notes. There is a time and a date stamp. It only records that when I've come out of the screen because that's the time it gives it. But when we came back in, we will see who entered the note, when they entered it, and obviously what the note is. You may add on to the same note or add additional notes later. So we're controlling paying the invoices and hopefully not paying things we don't want to be paying at this time. Cash book. Due to the time, and I want to do it is flying by, we're going to talk about bank feeds. And I think there's a whole lot of story. Anybody who comes to our workshops will know we've been covering this one. So I'm going to give more of a summary, but it's not really a new feature. We've had bank feeds. I'll explain what they are for those that don't know, since 2016. And if we're in cash book period end routines, we will see bank feeds reconciliation. I'll open the screen as a background and explain what this is. Bank feeds is a link from Sage into your bank account, not through the bank's own software, but a straight link into your bank account. We're in cash book. It is used for reconciliation as a first step of reconciliation. And with it set up, with it configured, and you're linking to your bank. And I don't know how well you can see, but because they're grayed for me, but there is a button top left, download transactions. If I click download transactions when it's enabled, your bank statement, your bank transactions, list of transactions from your bank will appear in this top left box. Pulls them straight through. Sage will show, when we selected the cashbook account, the top right will show transactions in Sage awaiting reconciliation. We would then typically click auto match, and the auto match looks at a window on the date. It's a 4-day, well, say 4-day, actually my testing was a 5-day, but it's a window on the date of the transaction and the value. It's not matching reference. Where it can find a unique match, it will bring them down into the bottom boxes as a starting point for reconciliation. If there are items it cannot make a unique match on, maybe it could be 1 or 2 different options, or maybe it's not in Sage. We have the usual option we have on the manual reconciliation screen of add transaction of type. We can enter new transactions into Sage on the fly. As soon as we click save on those screens, it puts them onto here, matches them automatically, brings them down into the bottom. So it's a means of starting an electronic reconciliation. I'm going to show you a little slide thing in a moment because it'll help you with some things, but there are 2 methods of bank feeds. You don't really know the difference because the mechanism I've just explained is the same either way. Sage have written some of their own bank feeds, their own connector that goes to certain banks, and that is something we call direct bank feeds. Where Sage have not, and there is an organization called Yodlee, who are a very large international organization. They write a connector for systems, and they do it for many systems other than with Sage and banks all around the world. And that is, if we're looking something up, that is something we will call an indirect bank feed because it is going via the provider Yodlee. That's included as part of your Sage. There's nothing else we need to think about, but the reason to know the difference is on the cashbook utilities. an option called bank feed rules. Bank feed rules only works with direct bank feeds, and this adds a feature where you can set rules where when we download from the bank, depending on that setup, hopefully the download will recognize certain transactions based on the information I've given it, and it will say to me, I have found a transaction that matches a rule. Shall I import that transaction into Sage? It is absolutely designed for things where you use the bank as the source of information. That would be bank interest, bank charges, maybe those sort of things we pick up from the bank and enter. I can set a rule, it will import and it will post them for me because I will have told it where to post. It also works on the customer and supplier accounts. It would be more rarely used on supplier because we're paying out of Sage, they're already there, and depending on how I receive my customer receipts, the customer receipts won't allocate, it doesn't know what they're being paid against, but there is some import mechanisms there. That's the reason to know. That will apply to direct bank feeds. There has also been a change in March this year called Open Banking. This is not Sage, this is a Sage page, but the Open Banking is not a Sage thing. You can Google it and find out more about Open Banking. In my view, the way I see this is the banks having their knuckles wrapped, and Open Banking is an initiative where banks have got to start making their systems accessible to others, people like Sage and any other application all around the world, to securely interact to make life easy for everybody, because banks should not put themselves behind closed doors and make life hard. The web page here, you'll get these slides, but it is a good one. So it's www.sage.com. You don't need an expert, it's just /open banking. It will open this page. It'll tell you what this initiative is. At the bottom of that page, there is a button. This is Sage, use our tool, it says. When we click on the tool, it takes us to an open banking checker, and we can check the status of the bank and the bank feed. And as I move down, there is a list, and there are lots of banks here. The open banking, there was a way of systems connecting into banks, which is a very old-fashioned way. It worked before. Basically, it was taking a screen scrape, very untechnical way of getting transactions out of the bank because the bank weren't electronically set up. That has been banned by this initiative. Banks have to open their door and do things properly. A lot of banks have not got ready, and they should have done. It should have been done by last September. The extension was given to them to March. They're still not ready. So what we'll find, if you were using bank feeds before March, that then became disabled because the bank weren't ready and they didn't do what they're supposed to do. When the banks do now get ready and they open their doors again for electronic connection, you will find an update on this page. You can download the new connector. This page will also tell me, working with my bank, is it an indirect or a direct bank feed? That will know if it's indirect, the pages explain as well. You're going through an intermediary called Yodlee. If it's a direct feed, that is Sage direct connection on the bank. That's a good thing. And apart from that, we get to use the bank rules as well. Other thing to say, when Sage add new features over the last few years, certainly they do, I think, put a pretty good effort into their help files. When you've got the screen open in Sage, open screen, I just opened bank feed reconciliation or the bank feed rules, press F1. F1 will take you into the online help files. They're publicly available. You don't need to enter any codes or have a log on. It just takes you straight there. You can open it straight through a browser. Lots of information on reconciling using bank feeds, how it works, but setting up, how to use it, and even, I'm not going to show it, bank feed rules. There is a video you'll find in the help files. You can watch how this thing works, how to set them up, and what it means to your Sage. I can see lots of questions. There's questions coming in, so I'm just going. I'll go slowly for a second to give you a chance to fire those in. And I might need to increase my pace slightly because there's some good things I still want to talk about. The mentioned earlier, I won't go into any detail, but it certainly has come upon a few conversations I've had with people, is invoicing. Seems such a small thing to say. Version 2017 summer saw a reintroduction of an invoicing module. Every site gets this. It's a standard, a free module in your license. It's part of the core financial suite. If you don't see it, it's been turned off in the features we saw earlier. If you are raising invoices outside of Sage, if you are certainly if you're raising invoice using the, I think, pretty awful sales ledger free text entry, it was never really designed for full invoicing. You may want to use this opportunity. Let's get our invoicing. You may need some help. There's not play with it in test companies. What I would do, I'll then go back to my support provider and say, actually, if you do need some help, maybe a bit of training, you may want help setting up the report layout, the template, email options, but it is an invoicing module where invoicing needs little explanation. We raise invoices, we would email them out. They will go out to the customers, obviously. They then appear in the sales ledger, the nominal ledger, VAT is updated. Invoicing is invoicing. Maybe it's a good time to have a play with it. My favourite subject, reporting. We'll talk about inquiries as well. But we love helping users to get more information out of their Sage. Again, lots of conversations happening at the moment for improving, and this ties back to the nominal ledger. Reports are driven, we all know reports are driven by codes and setup, report category codes, nominal codes. How do we use cost centers and departments? So we may be looking at nominal ledger as well. I am going to run a profit and loss report, one of my P&L reports. I've been using this report for about best part of 20 years. I've made little changes to it, other than a couple of things I want to show. So here's one of my versions of a profit and loss report. I'm showing period, actual budget variance, year-to-date actual budget variance. This was a report I could do in line 100. Nothing so amazing about that. I put a logo on it. I put a little box around some of the headline. I've not done much more, but you can probably guess where I'm going with this. Since version 2010 of Sage 200, we have had drill down as an option. It is not enabled by default on any report. We have to go into Report Designer. This is probably going to be some consultancy, but nevertheless not a great deal. It's a bit more fiddly than a 10-minute support call, that's for sure. What's my question to myself? My question to myself is, how is this actual figure made up? These are my report categories. This report design is purely my own choice, but I would like to click on this group code on my category code. I want to know how that figure is made up. I'm drilling into a report. It is a transaction listing for category. It is running for the category that I clicked on. It is also running for the accounting period that I ran the original report for. We've opened a new tab. I can click back to my original report. I can click this tab. The sum of this report matches the figure because it's running for the category and the period. You can see we know this report. My grouping are the nominal codes with transactions for this period on this category. I have then thought to myself, where would I like to go from here? URN number, we know what that is. I have a credit entry. I'd like to see the double entry of which that was a part. I can do that by running the URN report for the URN number that I've clicked on. And you can see here, I have said I would like to see the invoice. It is an invoice. The reference is the invoice number. It's an invoice report. What did that invoice look like? That's what it looked like when it went out. So I'm going through from my P&L through down to the transaction level. That invoice, by the way, is not a scanned image. It is a report that Sage is running, and because I create my invoices, maybe in a new invoicing module, in my case, it was sales order processing. Out of Sage, because this is something that's been coming up as well, and so it's a reminder, or if we don't know, for a few years now, in fact 5 years, users of Sage can speak to users of Sage 200 can speak to Sage directly, and Sage offer a report design service. They will design 3 reports for you each license year. When you go through your license renewal, you've lost any unused, but you will get 3 more. What they won't do is they won't touch profit and loss balance sheet reports, because invariably those need looking at your chart of accounts. It's often not, it goes beyond just a pure report design, but it's free up to the 3 reports. The Sage website, I'm on the screens here, will talk to me about how I do that, what's the process. I contact Sage, book an appointment. How things are at the moment, I don't know, but historically they usually have a conversation with you 2 or 3 days later. You will say, I've always wanted my age creditor report to show this, to show that, whatever that may be. If it's a simple change, we'll do it for you on support. But beyond that, support will say to you, actually, you get maybe this is one, you should use one of your 3. And for my users, when they've used this service, I had a user upgraded from Sage 50 a few years ago. They preferred a report in the Sage 50 style because that's what they were used to. They contacted Sage, and within the week they had their new report written for them and loaded into their Sage. Even more than the report design service, it's always puts a smile on my face for the excitement of Sage releasing a report of the month. Most of those, I would imagine, come from reports that they've been asked to do for use, which they've done for free. And they've been doing this since January 2015. There are now over 60 downloadable reports off of this site. So if I select, and you can see that when you log in, there'll be reports for modules that you don't use, that nominal ledger, and you can see the dates, the reports there, and it goes. There are over 60 of them. Some months they've released more than one month, and you can see information and you can download the report. Through this log on to the Sage community, you can look at future developments they're looking at in Sage, and you can vote on those or add your things. There are help systems on HR and how-to videos as well. It's quite a good resource. So we talked about the Ask Sage resource at the beginning, and this resource of reports and other things, including videos as well here, helping you get more out of your Sage. Continuing with reporting, and I'm moving right to the bottom of my menu, Excel reporting. Excel reporting was introduced in 2015. It was fairly straightforward in 2015. In 2017 summer, it got an update, which now makes it exciting for me. We've had this for a couple of years now, so it's not brand new. The ability to run trial balance, profit and loss reports, balance sheet reports as Excel sheets straight out of Sage. Be aware of the features I spoke about earlier. If things are turned off, you'll either not see the module at all, or you'll see some but not all of the reports. Sage have also tried to catch us out. If we're looking for trial balance, Sage have called it nominal account balances. It is a good pivot table that it sends out. If we're looking for something called profit and loss, Sage have called it revenue and cost reporting. So if you've not used it before, look for revenue and cost reporting. If we're for profit and loss and balance sheet reports, you do need to give it some setup, and you'll have an option also under Excel reporting called Financial Data Designer. Very straightforward to use, isn't playing about with data. You can't make anything, certainly do any damage here. You have multiple designs. I have not set up my balance sheet. This is how it will look if we've not used before. The left hand side shows me my category codes, and what I want to do is structure those on the right hand side how I want my report to look. If I choose the one layout I've done for an income expenditure, a profit and loss, this is how mine looks. It is this easy. My hint and tip, first thing to do, create all of the group. A group is a heading. We'll see it when I run the report. So I've created all 3 headings, the headings I wanted to give. That takes seconds. Then highlight the heading. On the left hand side, use the add to layout, and it will then add it under the heading you've got highlighted. Add the items in the order you want them to show. That is much easier than trying to move things around afterwards. So just know what you want. You can see on my screen that's not going to take me long. If I make a mess of it, I can just come out and start again or do a different layout. I'm going to roll down my list. I have got items called profit and loss. I'm going to explain that. I'm going to click. I'm going to select. The right hand side will tell me when it was last updated. If I view this report without updating, I will run it as it was last run. If I want to refresh the data, you click update. I'm saving time and I won't. I'm going to click view and open. Sage will send out a pivot table. This is my design. I've just showed you the design. I've done a little bit. I've probably done about 10 minutes of work of cosmetic design on this. It is a pivot table. Right click. Anyone, you will know pivot tables better than I do probably. I am not one of our consultants or trainers. I just do things to please myself. Pivot table. I am choosing to show the accounting periods similar to my P&L. Period budget variance, year-to-date budget variance. You may change all of these columns in realms of a pivot table allows. You might put cost centers side by side. You might put logos, change the headings. You can add more slices. These are standard ones that Sage put out to filter. You can change your year and swap around the years. You might create another one with the years as the columns. When I'm saying you can create them, well, one important point here, there is if you've run this in Sage, there is we'll call it an issue with the budget values that they're sending out and Sage gives some advice about how to get rid of negative budget values. Their advice is wrong. Don't follow the advice. It can have pretty poor consequences for your report. Sage's advice is to remove all negative values. If you remove all negative values and the values should be negative and the actuals, you won't report it. It will report that could be a disaster. If I show quickly on screen, but for support, I've got a formula here. There is a better formula to use that doesn't change the entire report. It corrects the reporting of the budget values. Use a custom formula. Back to my report. We have some expand and collapse, not quite as far as I've just showed within Sage. If I want to know how this value is made up, this is a report category. You may double click. It will drill you to the account balances, but you cannot drill, you cannot expand down into a transaction level. These reports are made up from balances on the accounts, not from transaction level. Transactions aren't part of this reporting. One great thing of this reporting, though, is there is a data tab. You can actually add your own columns on, calculation columns. This is the raw data. When we click update in Sage, it updates this data tab. Any pivot, this is a normal pivot table that comes straight out of the box, although I've changed it slightly. To create more tabs in different styles, you can just create new tabs and copy them over. They'll link to the data. When I send this, if I email this report out to somebody, the data is included. They may refresh, they may even change and play with their own layout as a one-off. The data is included, so they can also click filters and do some analysis themselves. You do not need to be connected to Sage. The only time the data gets updated is within Sage through the update button. If you make changes to your reports, as I've called them profit and loss, we then upload. Where is the file? You give it the file name. We'll upload that Excel sheet. You can see the XLSX in this. It will put it straight back in this and put it on this list. The data tab is there. All Sage needs to know is the data tab's there. When you click update, it looks at the data tab, it knows what's in that data, and it refreshes the data. It makes no difference what you do to the other tabs. That is not going to affect Sage. Sage doesn't even mind about those other tabs. It only minds about its data tab. Within Sage 200, my time's rapidly running out for me. We have something called workspaces. This is an inquiry design system you have within Sage. It's been there since 2009. I would guess most of you know about it. What I do want to quickly show is if we are not a Sage user, home working, this may be of interest to us. Since 2013, there has been, it comes under different names, Sage have called it a connected user. It is a web inquiry user, a browser-based inquiry user. There is a small cost for this. I think currently it's about £11 per month per user if we're adding them on. It allows a user to connect into Sage through a browser. If I'm on the network, it's a very easy setup. If I still on the network, it just runs the browser across the network. If we want it to run completely at home without logging onto anything, it's browser-based. I can do it from any machine. I can do it from a mobile phone, from a tablet. It takes me through to workspaces. My workspace, the features, the inquiries that we saw earlier allows me to turn on or off. I can restrict access. Let's just quickly show a workspace. The workspace I'm running, going to run here, not that one though, is exactly the same as if I was running it within Sage. So a normal Sage user gets this anyway. This is an inquiry. It's a 3-panel inquiry in this case, where I may select the supplier. The bottom left gives me the transactions. Right hand side tells me more information about the supplier. If my last click is on a transaction, right hand side changes to transaction detail, click the drop down, get more tabs. It is an inquiry system. It's more than an inquiry system. I can run reports through this. The reports run as PDFs, so through my browser, wherever I may be in the world, I can inquire on my accounts, on my nominal ledger. I can run reports. I may even go to Excel reporting, Excel reports, and those XLSX reports we just saw in Sage are also available for me to run through a browser. I can even change them, and I can even upload them and put them back into Sage. So if we've got users out there, especially in the way we're working at the moment, where they would benefit from having live immediate access to some information, there is a low cost answer. Our own users know that for the last 10 years, we've also had something addition called Report Console, which is not browser based. You need to be on the network. It is completely free of charge. It doesn't take a Sage license. It is unlimited users. There's controls behind it, but with its fairly simple setup, it will let any, I'm just doing this to show as I ran before, it lets the user, the non-accounts user, but someone I've given access, they're allowed, all we've done is gone through the console to select, and you can run, depending on the access, any report from Sage 200, and when I run it, it gives me exactly the same access. This user can still drill down. It's easy to set up where they can only run it on a certain cost center, so budget holders may run their own reports live from Sage, drill down into that data, send things into Excel. From us, that's completely free of charge. If in this current working, if we've got people at home who would normally shout across the office and say, can you do this for me? We know how that works. They can have their own web-enabled inquiry. They can have a reporting system, and that's completely free of charge. I think it seems a shame to me that for my hour and a half of hints and tips, there's a couple of important things to finish on, and I've got the Q&A, but that is my session on the hints and tips. Some controls for you, thinking about how you use Sage, and also if we're lucky enough to be able to take this opportunity of some cleaning and tidying, improving our reporting, those things we've always said, wouldn't it be great to do this? We just haven't got time. That would be my encouragement to spend some time and use it. We've got a lot of questions. A lot of questions are coming, and I suppose I'm not sure if that's a good. I'm assuming that's a good thing. I know there's lots I would have loved to have covered. I would love to have you here for 3 hours or more, especially like we do in our normal workshops. We're going to have to. Hopefully, if you're not sure whether we know who you are, the next slide I'm going to be ready to write down the email address. You can come back. I'm time-wise, and my apologies, I overran as well. But let me pick some couple of things that have been lined up really. Importing budgets. Yes, I showed the nominal screen where you can import accounts. It's in the same place. There's a setting there where you import accounts, transactions, or budgets. So it's nominal ledger utility. I'm being quick. Nominal ledger utilities import ledger, the import ledger file screen we saw, and there's an option there. Good thing on imports, all the standard imports in Sage, I've said it before, open that screen, press F1 for help. That's also another good page in Sage. Not only does it talk about the imports, you can download, there are links there, you can download all of the import templates. There's an Excel template that gives you information about the import, more information. There's also a CSV download that gives you the actual example. Download both, because that'll be your full set of information. Never ever run an import without testing in the test company first. I should have actually thought more about this. There are questions about authorization, and yes, because of home working, it doesn't actually say on the question, but I'm assuming that's more to do with purchase invoices. Sage has a very simple authorization option. It's not a workflow, but you can turn authorization in the settings. It lets you put a purchase invoice onto the supplier account. It'll be marked with a query flag of use, so it can't be paid. The nominal posting is to unauthorized purchase. Then when it comes back to you as authorized, you can go into the authorization option in Sage, and by giving it the correct nominal postings, you're authorizing it at the same time, and it'll rejournal it to the correct codes. Personally, I would use, if you're not using something else on the purchase invoice, use the second reference as the person you're sending it to. Maybe you're emailing out saying, here's an invoice, can you authorize it? A workspace is the best place for it. It's the best inquiry because it's got the query flags noted on it and the second reference. Workspaces, there's some, you can right click on those workspaces and you can set an action and a default action as well as other actions. You can set your default action to amend details. If I email an invoice to somebody and they say that's not mine, I've sent it on to John, or they send it back to me to send it on to somebody else, you can set the double action on the workspace, double click, it'll open the amend details. You can just change the second reference and save it again. Easy way to update that. When I run a report at month end, I can see invoices I've had, they're under query. That means they're out there for authorization, and I can see who's got it. I know who to chase. To extend that, many people know there are add-ons. Cycon is one that we would use, and there is an electronic workflow process to improve upon that. We'd like to see Sage improve as well. I'm going over time already. So there are questions about backing up, I suppose, as we'd expect really, but actually for answering those, we will come back to everybody because it's the important one to know about. But speak to your IT, look at that Ask Sage article I sent you, share that with your IT, think about how you're connecting. If your connections are very slow, that may be an indicator to you, but read it. I wouldn't say you need to understand it. You definitely need to talk to your IT. If we're hosting you on the Microsoft Azure platform, you're covered on the backups. If you're using other hosting platforms, web servers, again, talk to those providers, make sure you've got a backup. As long as you've got a backup every day, we know that whatever happens that day brings to us, we're going to be okay. Phew, I'm sorry I haven't overrun, but well, I suppose actually we started 2 minutes late. I'm about right. For close, the email address, if you joined this event, if you'd received the invite from us, that invite will have come to you from my colleague Anne-Marie. So she is Anne, it's on top of the screen there, Anne-Marie at centrepointsoftware.co.uk. It's been, I keep hearing on television, it's been a bite-sized event. Use that email address to ask more questions you think of afterwards. Maybe you'll go back and hopefully you'll look at your Sage. That may then prompt questions. Certainly if you're supported by us, you're going to phone in to support. Anything else, anything more general, contact Anne-Marie, and Anne-Marie will then forward that around the team. It may well come to me, it may well then be me that comes back to you or somebody else. We're here to help. We're all in these strange times together, and we're still feeling our way through pretty much as well. Make sure your Sage is safe and secure, and if you can, think about improving as well. If you're not sure we have your email address and you would like to receive the record, again, send Anne-Marie an email, say, I'm not sure if you have my address or if it's right, please send me the links to here. And I'll remind you again, if you're watching the recording of this event, you can also, it doesn't matter how long afterwards, use that email and say, I've only just watched it, but I have these questions and can you help me? That will be fine. I'm going to thank you all again. I know it finishes everything on television, but one has to say it. We're going to stay safe, stay careful, stay well. Thank you for joining the event. I will say thank you to all of you. Thank you. Goodbye.